Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pod TV's number one investing show, Wall Street Hackers, with your host, Peter Bennett, who received his bachelor's of economics at UCLA, his law degree at the University of Miami, and of course, his master's in finance and investing in NYU. And everyone, I'd like for you to help me welcome Peter Bennett, who is bringing to us some really great strategic steps on how to survive this current economic storm that we're having to swim through. Welcome, Peter.
Hey, Kim, and you're right. It is a bit of an economic storm. For some people, it's a big economic storm. Welcome, audience. By the way, you can catch a new Wall Street Hackers most weeks on Thursdays or Saturdays, depending on your distribution channel. But yeah, the markets, you're right, Kim. The markets have been tough. You had ups and downs, obviously, but basically have gone nowhere in a year and a half. And for a year and a half, Wall Street Hackers has been saying the same thing over and over strategically. And I think it's just going forward going to be a while of the same. And basically, number one, inflation is out of control. Why? It seems obvious. Number one, the Fed is trying to do slower, higher, but longer. And one has never been done. But two, it's going to take a long time. And sometimes it's even with rates much higher than inflation, it's taken 10 years on average to control inflation. So who knows how many years this is going to be? That's what I think we're going to be in, sort of a stagnant market now where everybody is just hoping and hoping, maybe for years, and it doesn't go anywhere. There's still a lot of money to be made, though. That's good news if you're in the right places. So why do we say this? Again, one, the Fed. And interestingly, the Fed met this week and sort of surprised the market, which I always call delusional, because the market thought the rates were going down in the fall. As you know, in the spring, I say, no, they're not going down in the fall. Now the Fed is talking about a potential rate hike or even two this fall again. And the market was saying, as of last week, oh, the rates are coming down next year and it's going to be a full point. And the Fed said, no, it's going to be now half a point. And I don't even think it's coming down at all next year. We might even need higher rates next year. But it's so the Fed and the markets are on two pages, and the Fed is probably making big mistakes anyway. Number two, the government keeps spending and spending. Everybody hears about the deficits, but it's bigger than ever. They're spending more than ever, and that's stimulating the economy and stimulating inflation. Three, we're still not at, but near 50-year low unemployment. The last time it was that low, we were talking about the 70s, over a decade of outrageously high inflation. And especially energy. And that's where the big money, I believe, will be made. One. So that's the focus of this week's market report, which is energy. We're always talking about the long-term structural situation. It's so obvious to me there's going to be problems because the oil and gas companies are investing less than half of what they used to put into long-term projects before 2015. In other words, the 2015 levels were more than double what they're doing today. Now, these projects are 5 to 7 year projects, but that's going to catch up to the oil and gas market because if you're not putting the money in, where's the oil of the future going to come? The development, the projects, the building. If the capital's not there, why are they putting so little in there? One, the government of the U.S. and the world are basically hurting the oil companies and their development by putting in tons of regulations. The U.S. government alone has put in over 100 different regulations and taken actions to stifle the oil industry. And same in other countries. Number two, the oil and gas companies are putting in 10% of their budgets just in ESG projects, carbon sequestration, other things, which is good for the environment, but not good for future oil and gas. Generally, some of these won't produce anything. They'll just reduce pollution. And three, if they're a terminal business, and all projections to 2050 say they're not, and the oil and gas in the world are probably going to be up considerably, especially natural gas, because of the developing world's populations growing and people want heat and people want to drive cars, and people want to cook with heat in developing countries, and they're growing. So most projections are they're not terminal business. But if they were in a terminal business, like some of the prognosticators say, then they're not going to put all their money into the business until the last day. They're going to start taking some out in dividends or buying back stock. And so, but the problem is one of the companies that we used to have, and we did very well with USAC, and I still like it to a point. Maybe I'll get back in there at some point. But they said on their conference call within the last year that they believe the oil and gas industry is putting in 40% too little to maintain oil and gas production where it is. What if one day we're missing 40% of oil and gas? Just get oil and gas go to $200, $300 a barrel oil? I don't know, but it's a black swan that's happening, and I don't see it not happening, and I certainly don't see energy prices heading down generally. Although up and down it can go, short term anywhere. So let's look at now. So that's the reality of the long-term structural issue why oil and gas is probably going to keep driving inflation. But now let's look at just a few short-term things within now or the next year. Chevron, first of all, oil's back up over around $90 a barrel. It was about 60 something, I think 68 3 months ago. And we're heading into the fall season now where it should be going down, but it's going up. So that's not good news for inflation. But so Chevron's CEO told Bloomberg this week he sees oil prices getting, quote, close to reaching the $100 level due to tightening supply. And U.S. crude futures were at a 10-month high of around $91. So here's the CEO of Chevron saying, well, $100 barrel, but at some point it could go much, much higher. It could really cause structural issues for the world's economies. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but somebody should be a little smarter about and have some more business sense than what they're doing. And by the way, I'm going to mention this a little later, but also on the pollution front, they're not helping, they're actually hurting. But we'll get into that as a side on another story. So, and here's another point, and this is just theoretical, but President Biden emptied most of the strategic reserve, petroleum reserve in the United States. It's actually at the lowest it's been since 1983. Now, he did that 6 months before the last midterm election, which is very suspicious indeed, considering that the emptying ended basically at the election. But either way, it's at the lowest it's been in 1983. Now, we're heading to another election in 24, and this is theoretical, but I think it's quite possible. So the oil companies don't like President Biden because he's stifling energy production and anti-energy in so many ways. But the Saudis also don't like President Biden for many political reasons, supporting Iran, not being allies enough to Saudi Arabia. Maybe he doesn't like them because they produce oil and he thinks it's bad for the world. But here's the problem. So heading into an election, I don't think they're going to get together, the oil companies or Saudis, with somebody and say, oh, let's get Biden out. But they all know that high oil prices coming into 24 is really going to hurt Biden. And they probably would like him. So who knows what they'll do. But either way, we're looking at problems in the whole structure, short-term and long-term. But finally, so here's another point. So let's forget about everything and just look at this. And this is getting into the pollution area too. So coal demand in the world is now at record highs in 2023. And you go, wait a minute, I thought we're supposed to be helping pollution. So according to the International Energy Agency, who should know, they're saying that the developing countries are using more and more coal. One analyst said they're not going to crucify themselves on a cross of sustainability, unlike the developed countries. So they also said in that article that oil is much worse than CO2 in terms of coal. So I'm sorry, coal is much worse than oil instead of CO2. So that means basically we're going to and by the way, the Southeast Asian countries alone, which is China and the production countries like Vietnam, account for 3 out of 4 tons of coals consumed worldwide. So basically, Asia's consuming a ton of coal. But what does this mean? One, they wouldn't mind using oil because they don't like pollution, but it also means demand for energy is soaring. So this gets me to two key points. Number one, and these are so important and so unbelievable that nobody is emphasizing this. And this is true if you're an environmentalist, if you're just concerned about global warming, or if you're concerned about world economies. It's the most obvious points to me, but yet it seems to go over the head of many people, especially in governments. One, stifling production in developing countries like the United States and shipping it over to Asia is not helping the world's situation in terms of pollution or economies. So you have to create ways that the manufacturing comes back. Number two, and this is even a bigger error, the developed countries in the United States fight oil, gas, and coal equally, or they fight them all a lot. Let me put it that way. So what happens is oil gets burned and natural gas gets used instead of coal. Right. They don't have enough oil and natural gas. So coal gets used instead of oil and natural gas. Natural gas gets used instead of I really twisted this. My apologies. So oil gets used instead of natural gas, and oil and natural gas get used instead of coal. A little twisty there. So what I'm saying is and by the way, if you look at Boston, the Northeast, Europe, they were burning a lot of coal last year because they didn't have enough natural gas and oil. So if I was an environmentalist or had any economic sense, I'd be doing things like saying, okay, let's help natural gas as a temporary fuel, not hurt oil so much, and go after coal. And I know if you're in a coal country, state, or whatever, you may not even like that. Sorry. But in the end, the point is, not only are all the strategies failing in terms of the environment, and the proof is in 2023, world and U.S. CO2 production was higher than 22, and world and U.S. higher in 22 than 21. It's all going the wrong way. All right, that took a lot of time on energy. Quote of the week. I have to move it until we get to the other conversations. Number one, Barron's said, I'm going to shortcut this quote. Basically, Fed policy in 24 is now about how long it will be. And the market has, as I said, been obsessed, I said delusional, about the question of a quarter hike or lowering now. But the point is, the market is not compensating for the fact that this is going to be a long haul and rates are probably going up. And they also mentioned energy, by the way, and say that rate cuts next year rest on the continued easing in inflation, even as oil and prices have jumped, which could affect other costs, such as warnings come from airlines have suggested. Yes, of course, it's going to drive it. It's a cause. Okay, 5 most interesting stories. This one was in the news a lot, but it was interesting and crazy. So the United States traded 5 hostages with Iran, but the United States decided to throw in $6 billion. So it's 5 for 5, which seems even, and they're throwing in $6 billion they're giving to Iran. Now, they're saying it's for humanitarian aid, but it still helps the Iranian economy and helps the Iranian government. And they're saying it was Iranian money that was locked up, but it's still freeing the money. And many critics are saying that's ransom, but the administration says no. Number 2, interesting story. The U.S., and this was in the news all over the place too, the U.S. deficit now hit $33 trillion. It's really probably over $100 trillion easily, because they're not counting Medicare and Social Security unfunded liabilities. And other countries are in the exact same situation. So it's just in the United States. Huge unfunded liabilities, much bigger than they're saying. So, but the point is that nobody mentioned is, I saw it this week that total U.S. retirement assets as of June 30th were $37 trillion. So let's just say that 31 is only 37, even though it's probably 137 or 200 trillion in real debt. That means that every dollar that every retiree has put away is going to be needed to fund the liabilities. It's out of control. No, interesting story number 3. 2.2 million federal workers exist, but only 4,000 are presidential appointees. So the president doesn't have a lot of power on who gets changed, but the people who can be changed are lawyers and bureaucrats. So when President Trump was elected, he quickly issued an order that said he could classify and at least terminate those lawyers and bureaucrats who make policy. But when President Biden came in, he terminated that and said, no, we can't even fire those people. So now the Democrats are proposing to reclassify those workers so that they can never be fired either. As Vivek Ramaswamy, Republican candidate, and I don't necessarily support him, but I thought he made a good point. He said, speaking as a CEO, if somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you, which is true. You have no hire and fire. How do you control somebody at all? And what if they're incompetent? And by the way, federal employees get bigger salaries and fatter benefits than private sector. So at least they should have some checks. If you happen to be incompetent, it might make government work more, function more. This is the first time I think ever I've reported the same story twice, but it's so interesting. U.S. scientists are saying they likely developed a cancer-stopping pill that can annihilate tumors. It was in the August 1st Cell Chemical Biology Journal, and they still need to have testings, but it's amazing. I mean, the thing is, they're going to develop miracle cures within the next decade, and they're unlocking the genomic code. So what that means is, one, there's going to be a lot of cures for a lot of things. People may wind up living decades longer. Maybe they'll reach 150 years. Even some people are predicting the next 10 years. It's unbelievable. It's true. Some people predict that. And also, the other implication is financial. It's a financial show. I'm not sure the drug companies are going to do so well if they start curing things, with simple medications. Maybe these things will be expensive initially, but maybe it's just a pill, and all of a sudden, no allergies, or this disease cured, or whatever. And it sounds crazy, but change is happening fast. Oh, and the last story, very interesting. Last interesting story is a team of international astronomers say they have found, they say, potential evidence of life in the atmosphere of another world for the first time. They looked at an exoplanet in the, quote, Goldilocks region, a habitable zone. What they look for is liquids on the planet, and also they look for the right temperature zone, and that's called Goldilocks. And basically, this planet is K2-18, if you want to look it up. It's 110 light years from Earth, but it's very strong evidence. They found a chemical called dimethyl sulfide, which is considered an evidence marker of life. So the points are two, I guess. One, I think they will prove that there is some kind of life out there. Two, ET is not visiting soon. Why do I always say that? Well, the nearest planet, the nearest star, which would be the nearest planet outside our solar system, if at the current speed that we can travel, the fastest, and we can go pretty fast when we're out in space, circling the Earth in a day or hours or whatever it is, I have to look it up, but we travel very fast. But at the current fastest speed we can attain now, to get to the nearest star, it would take 6,000 years. So even if we doubled the speed or quadrupled it, which is phenomenal, and I don't know if we could ever do that, we look at thousands of years to reach a planet, and we don't even know which direction to head in. And that's why I don't think we're getting any visits from ET, because it's the same distance for ET to come here. So that's my theory on aliens. We don't have them. So hold on one second, because we're not going to take a break when we normally do. I have to get some new papers. And so normally we'd have an advertisement, but we're moving along today. So what to do? As I've been saying forever, a year and a half, whatever, you have to be very defensive in this market. You want to allocate whatever stocks you have to either energy or dividend payers. Why do I say dividend payers? My favorite chart. I show it almost pretty much every week. This shows over 50 years that dividend payers and dividend growers outperformed there it is. Thanks, Kim. You pulled it right up. So dividend payers and very professional. So if you look at the S&P 500, it did very well over the last 50 years to 22. But keep in mind that was during mostly a decreasing rate period from the high rates in 70s. But now in an increasing rate period, this may not happen, but even $100 turned into 4,000 roughly over 50 years, 8,000 in dividend payers and 13,000 in dividend growers. So where do you want to be? You want to be there. Okay, dividend stock of the week. In this case, it's funds. You could take the chart down. Thank you, Kim. That was great. So dividend funds of the week. First of all, disclaimer, this is for entertainment only. Consult your financial advisor. There are never any guarantees. Anybody who says that anything's guaranteed is wrong, because first of all, even a CD isn't really guaranteed against inflation. So those are our disclaimers. It is my opinion, although we've given some pretty good calls since the show has begun. And mainly, especially in energy, where we love pipelines and energy companies. And but this is the first time in a year and a half I've given pretty much every week a dividend pick. But this week I'm giving something that's a dividend pick, but not something I'm in right now in any size. Why? Because of the energy crisis that I think we're in, the inflation issue. I'm waiting. But what I did is we have a microscopic portion right now in RSPS, which I've mentioned on one of the show, about 1/8% in there right now, just as a taste, to watch it. But basically, what I'm looking at is 3 funds that I might consider in the future, and I like them all, especially if you want a diversified portfolio and you really don't want to pick your stocks. Now, I believe in stock picking the way I do it, but here's your 3 funds that could be part of a portfolio now or in the future, and I think in the future. RSPS, which is the Invesco Consumer Staples Fund, VIG, which is the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation Fund, or even SPY, the S&P 500 fund. So I compared those 3 funds, and I was surprised, actually. I found a lot of similarities as well as some differences, but there were surprising similarities. Number 1, they're all large funds. Number 2, they are mainly large cap companies. But 3, surprisingly, the 10-year return on all these is pretty close for all of them. And you did pretty well in the last 10 years, again, largely during a decreasing rate environment, but you got about 10% a year annualized in all 3 of them. Differences. RSPS is almost all consumer staples, and that's simple enough to explain. VIG and SPY are in many ways similar, and they both have large, they're about 23 to 27% consumer defensive, but they both have large consumer cyclical, which is not good if you think things are getting tough. VIG especially has a 27% consumer cyclical, and both have 26% in technology. Now, I like technology as a sector. I'm not in it just because I love energy, and energy is even outperforming tech. And I like dividends, and it's hard to get dividends in tech that look good. And it's a changing sector. I would point out that if you look at the 1970s, 2000, if you look at the top 5 companies that were in the dot-com boom, Alcatel, Lucent, those are names you don't even hear anymore. They were either bankrupted or absorbed. I don't know what happened, but things change in tech. And I'm not a tech expert. And so I like tech. I don't love it. But right now, I'm staying away from tech because if interest rates go higher, it's going to hurt tech a lot. So those are things to consider for the future. Maybe put a little in now. I can't guarantee when, timing is hard to do. But right now, I'm holding out on that. And my portfolio of stocks is largely energy and all dividend growers and payers. So next week, we'll get into some actual dividend picks. Thanks, Kim. Perfect timing because we're in for the panel discussion of the week. And an interesting topic. The question is, will China probably, definitely, or not dominate the world economically in 2050? So a little background. First of all, almost all forecasters and prognosticators, numbers you see, say, yes, China's going to dominate the world economically in 2050. They could be right, they could be wrong. That's the question of the day. Positives for China. First of all, their GDP growth has blown away other countries, probably most countries at least, the United States, especially in Europe. If you look at just the last 10 years, except for 1 year when in COVID 20, when they were actually -2, they've averaged about 6 to 8% a year growth. That's huge GDP growth. It's phenomenal. And if you take that and they keep that up, then they're going to be the biggest world economy. Number two, at least in theory, they right now have a theory that they can turn their population, which is 2 billion, into consumers. So they've been growing on the West's, the United States and Europe's and other countries, a few other countries who are large consumers. So that was their strategy in the past, but they have a theory that says, wait a minute, anybody can consume. People want more things. People want resources. We're going to get our people. We're going to take our money that we're bringing in, and we're going to get our population to be more successful and consume more, and by stimulating their market. So that could work very well. Some negatives towards this would say, wait a minute. Number one, just this week, Mexico became the largest trading partner with the United States. And that is a huge change. It was China. So number two, many developed countries and companies are making efforts to diversify away from China for so many reasons. Number three, China has a big real estate crisis that's been going on for a while now. They stimulated their simps, these artificial cities, to stimulate their economy, but because they don't have capitalism, a lot of that money went to the wrong place. And local governments are now very reluctant to borrow to stimulate, even though China wants them to. So those are some negatives. In addition, there's some big negatives, but let's see what Kim says. What do you think, Kim? Do you think China could actually dominate the world? Oh, Kim, I cannot hear you.
Sorry about that. We
okay.
had some noise going on in the background. I believe that if China wanted to economically, yes, I think they can, because they have had the patience to put in place and plan and prepare to secure themselves financially and make them a bigger superpower than even what the U.S. is. However, I just love, those movies that inspire us. And I watched the Guardians of the Galaxy last night with some friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned something. I think that's a very powerful statement where, the one superhero was telling the other, I never used my brain. I used my heart.
Okay.
And I think this is what separates us, even though we're quite divided right now. And I think anybody could take us over the way we're divided. But I think that when our heart comes into play, we are stronger.
Oh, nice.
Much stronger.
I like that. That's an interesting take on it. It's a non-mathematical take. So
it's and you know me, I'm an engineer, stats and math, right? But this was different to sit there and feel the impact of a true gladiator or somebody
it's a great point, because the thing is, they have one person or very few people running the thing, and they don't necessarily have the heart and the emotion. Maybe again, who knows? But here's some more analytical point, because I'm more analytical than a feeler. But number one, here's 4 reasons why they're going to have issues, and anything can happen. But one, demographics. So the whole world is facing aging populations. And this is going to cause stress on all the economies of the world. Resources, aging people, too few young people to support aging populations, and free medical care in the whole world, or almost in the U.S. But they had a one-child policy for years, which they regretted. Then they turned it to 2, then they turned it to 3, and they're saying, please have children, because they realized that these aging populations are not stable in terms of economics. So who's going to support all these old people? Young, it's going to cause a lot of turmoil and issues. Number 2, wrong decision makings. One, they don't have free markets. So basically they make decisions like building cities that nobody wanted to come to. And that's something against what they're doing. And also wrong geopolitical decision making. I have no idea why they're so hostile, but maybe it's not a good idea to be hostile to much of the world, especially the developed world, when you have 2 billion people. And here's the key: robotics and AI. So when you have 2 billion people and they can work for low wages, that's a real plus. When you have 2 billion people and they're being replaced by robots and you don't need people anymore, unfortunately, because so many jobs in the world are going to be done by AI and robots, what do you do with those 2 billion people? And why is that an asset anymore? I'm not sure that's an asset anymore, because the robots are going to be building a lot, you're doing more and more in the plants. And, it's going to be a really difficult road for a lot of societies, but especially for China. So in conclusion, one, in the 70s, everybody thought Japan was going to be dominant, and they really hit a long period of stagflation. And nothing is certain in the world in terms of change. We're looking at decades, and everybody adjusts. The West is going to adjust. Everybody's going to adjust. Robots are coming. All kind of demographic changes are coming. It's a changing world. It's an exciting world. I'm interested to see what happens, but it is it's a changing world. And finally, the U.S. could get a lot smarter and turn back to its more capitalist and smarter policies economically. So we're out of time, and we rushed it, but thank you. Thanks for watching. I think we had a good show. Thanks, Kim.
Yes, we did.
And as always, as Kim says, get healthy and get wealthy, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.